There we are, guys. Close to wrapping it up, we're going to talk about the master chain and how is your master chain looking like right now? That is my question for you. And I'll give you an answer to how mine looks like because it's actually not that hard. For a long time in the music industry, especially in the dance music industry, people have been talking about master chains, about this magical master chain that's going to make the difference between a fat master and a really poor master and a weak master. But in my honest belief, I think it's more about the mix than it is about the master chain. Of course, if you have a good master chain, it really helps getting that final result, that final thickness in the bass, maybe the little bit of an edginess in the high frequencies of your synths. And yeah, it can definitely bring something, and it can definitely add up the last 20% of the mix, but it's not going to be the difference between day and night. Now, how does my master chain look like? I'm being very honest, it is different every time. But for my go-to master chain, I have a couple of plugins that I almost always end up using. And in order to show you guys, I think it's time to move back to the project. Here we are in our freshly saved V2 project. I think it's a good moment to show what we have going on the master and what it's doing and why it's there. So first off, let's play the mix as it is. Okay, what do we have? We have a gain. Now, earlier on in the masterclass, we really cranked this up to 5 to show you guys what happens if you have too much gain and too much loudness on the input of your master chain. I already put it back to 3.8, and I think we can even go a little bit lower so we have a little bit more of a breathing in the master chain going on. Before we do that, I'm first going to dig in all the plugins and why it's there. Now we have the BX Control, and the same as with the gain earlier on the masterclass, we showed why this is here, because I have a mono maker, which helps me getting the image, the stereo image mono, everything under 150 Hertz. Now, this is completely up to you. I just use 150 as an example because everything under 150 does not make sense at all to have that stereo. So making sure that the low end is mono is going to keep some space for the instruments that need stereo to breathe overall. So that is what the BX Control is doing. It can do much more. You can do panning, you can add some stereo width, but I'm not touching that as we speak. We can actually try adding that a little bit later and see if it increases or if it helps the master to sound even better. But I wonder, because I just usually like to stereo placement to do that in the mix down instead of in the mastering process. We're gonna move forward to the Neve. Now, if you own the UAD expansion and you have the actual hardware, this is something that is really helping you guys. This plugin to me is one of these plugins that is just, you know, bringing some magic to your mix. As you can see, this is my UAD control panel. I don't have a lot of plugins going on, and it's nicely divided over the different DSPs. And if you're not familiar with UAD, which is Universal Audio, this basically is a company that is focusing on bringing old plugins back to life and you know, kind of rewiring, getting the magic from the actual devices to a software plugin. And because of them, we are so able to actually get all that old, like thick, fat, old gear into the box and just wire it with one FireWire cable and you're good to go. So is this worth to invest in? It really, really is. It is gonna get you that, you know, extra level of control, and especially when it comes down to adding some warmth to your mix and some really detailed sculpturing, I would say UAD is a really must-have. So talking about UAD, I have the Neve here, the 88RS Legacy, and it's a plugin that I started using since the production of Toulouse, and I never let go of it since then. So what does it do? It basically is a channel strip from a Neve mixing console, and I basically just activate equalizer, and I don't even use all of this, to be honest. So I just like the sound and the coloring of this plugin a lot, and especially when it comes down to the equalizer. And what did I do? I added just a little bit of the low end here, and I'll show you why that is, why that it needs it. Because right now, let's see what happens if I put this all the way down and then compare. It is going to jump back. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Sometimes when I click compare, it does not do anything, and I want to make sure that I get the same levels back when I twist and turn. There you go. It has a lot of impact as it's completely, entirely taken away the low end. So I would suggest to not overdo this, because you can really mess your mix up if you do too much. But the sound and the warmth of it is just really what makes it different from the normal Logic EQ or an EQ by someone else. So it's giving a warm, nice feeling to it, next to the fact that it's just doing its job very, very well. What else do you do? I would say every equalizer has its own perks, and this one I just use for the low end mostly, and especially for the lower low end between 120 and let's say 140 and 60, and at this point it's just cranking the 120, 110 series here. So I would just use it for this range, and you can also use it as a bell if you want to. And there's the high end, which I'm not doing a lot with at this plugin right now, because I have different plugins working on the high end. So right now the Neve really is working the low, and I'm going to keep it like that. So what else do we have going on? From the Neve we go into the limiter. Not doing a lot. I would just say, if you're using the FabFilter plugins, and especially the limiter, one of the first things that I tend to do is put this on transparent, because then you know you're not gonna sacrifice too much, and you're not gonna bring too much coloring into the master of your mix. So I would just gain it a little bit, but it doesn't need that much of a gain at this level. So it's already ducking a little bit, so I wouldn't go much louder on the master, to be honest. I never really touched the attack and release either. And if you tend to, touch these buttons here, I would say make sure that you compare, because sometimes whenever you work on these buttons here, it's not going to make the sound or the punch or attack release much better. For some reason, every time I use the attack release on the FabFilter plugins, and especially on the limiters, I mess up my own sound, so I tend to just stay with the default settings of attack and release on this one. Look ahead, it doesn't need it really, so I'm just going to keep it transparent, have it work just a little bit on the gain. Then, what else do we have? We have a multi-band compressor, and I just took one of these presets here real quick, just to get to a result where we're happy with as a demo, and I start from there and start tweaking it, but I think we're already quite close to the sound that I wanted to give. So the good part and the good side of multi-band compression is that you can work those frequencies separately. So that means that at one frequency you can compress a little bit more than on the other one. Sometimes you want the highs to be compressed and sound as equal as possible, so that needs a different compression than the mids, and the same goes for the mid-lows and the lows. So that's why I think that multi-band is quite nice. You can actually use Wave C4 here. FabFilter multi-band kind of does the same thing. For now I'm going to stick with FabFilter, leave it there, didn't do too much. Then another magic plugin to me is the PSP Vintage Warmer, and no matter what version Apple comes out with, it will keep working for some reason. So big shout out to PSP's producers and the company that actually makes these plugins. I absolutely love this plugin since day one, and I think they have built the PSP Vintage Warmer 1 already roughly like 10 years ago. So big shout out. It's absolutely an insane plugin. Now, what does it do? And to be really honest with you, it really is just everything that the name already has. A vintage warmer, and it for some reason also works a little bit of the highs without messing it up entirely, which a lot of vintage warmers do, especially when it is going to give you that that like warm feeling. It sacrifices the highs, and for some reason this plugin doesn't do that. So we'll see what happens if we switch it on and off. So what does it do? Well, first of all, it's gonna really hit the highs a little bit. It's really gonna give more clarity in the highs. And it kind of brings the mids down a little bit, just a little bit, as it kind of warms it up. Well, it actually does exactly what it tends to do, which is it makes the sound warmer, not necessarily louder. So I think it really glues everything together quite nicely and has a consistent output, which is something that I think is important when you play it out live. It feels less bumpy. It really feels like it's sticking to one level, and everything is just really just consistent in its own place. There we have it, the U80 Oxford Inflator. I actually used to own the original version of the Oxford Inflator, which is not supported by OS X 64 bits anymore. So now I'm using the emulated version of U80, which actually is more stable, and I absolutely love this plugin. You can actually crank your master without completely destroying the sound of it. Still though, I would say percussion is needed. Don't be too aggressive on these sliders here, because again, it's about balancing it out. It's not about cranking things up without knowing what you're doing. I'm just using a 0.67 of dB of an extra boost on the input, and you can play around with the effect button. And if you wanted to soft clip, you can enable this button here, but you can also just have it clip here in the VU meter, and it will look like this. I think the effect is not needed at this point. I think we already have enough loudness, and I think it's already a quite filled up spectrum, so I'm gonna leave that slider for what it is and just play with the input a little bit. See how much of a difference that is? It's much more stable, consistent. The synths are sitting in place nicely. The kick is punching through. It feels like the synthesizers and the leads are less stuttery in the mix. It really starts to blend in nice together. And that is getting us to the last plugin, which is the reference. And it is a nice plugin here, Magic AB. Multiple plugins that you can use here. There's the Magic AB2, there's the original, which is this one. You can use a reference by mastering the mix, also one of my favorite plugins. For now, I have all these demos loaded in here, so I'm gonna go with Magic AB, and this reference plugin is gonna give us a lot of information on how loud it is against other songs, and if there's anything that you really missed out on when it comes to the spectrum. So I'm just gonna play and compare one of these songs here and see how our song sounds like against it. Yeah, man, I'm actually really happy. It's doing really well. There is songs that are louder. For example, Axwell and Shipov really cranked it on the master and they achieved 5.0 RMS, which is an amazing result. Again, don't be misled by the loudness. It's not only about the loudness, it's also about how your song sounds like quality-wise and how the mix performs overall. So if you're happy with the song, you can tweak your gains and see how far you can go without cranking the overall instruments too much. It's about a nice and a balanced result. It has to sound great everywhere, not just on amazing speakers. Your song should also sound great on smaller speakers and on headphones. So it's a good idea sometimes to just put on a headphone, maybe even use an iPhone speaker or a Samsung speaker, whatever Android you have, and see how your song performs there. Because don't forget that most of the people that consume the song, that listen to the song, that are not in festivals, are going to play through their in-ears, or their headphones or their home speakers. So don't forget that it's a good idea to just check the track out there and see how it performs. Maybe there's things that you're missing out on because you're working on studio speakers. So yeah, don't forget to just play it out, just like everyone else, in the car, at your phone, and see how it performs.